Okay, it's been a while since I made a video, so I'm just going to plunge right in and get going. This is a video for Ben A, who's very bravely submitted his artwork to me when I put out a call on X for drawings for my DRAWOVER playlist. So by doing that, he really demonstrated the first thing you need to progress, which is just courage. Lack of fear. You know, put yourself out there and face your own mistakes, which usually you have to do privately. Here he's consented to let me make a video using his drawings. So Ben's drawings are fairly typical of a beginner, an amateur who's got some basic idea of shapes and lines and rendering, and is trying to find the next steps. Of course, in this day and age, there's just endless information on the internet. There's different teachers, there's different points of view, styles, and of course, there's an abundance of finished material where you see final comic book art. And in a way, that's a big help if you know how to use it, but it's also can be highly confusing because, you know, you can even be encouraged to jump forward too fast. Now, Ben's probably heard this advice before, but I'm going to say what needs to be said, really, and be honest. It's really that the basics have to be studied. And you have to kind of decide where to start, because when you're trying to sort of scrape together enough knowledge of drawing, you've got all these potential things that you could get into. You know, there's anatomy, there's perspective, figure drawing, drapery, light and shade. Then for comics or for any other thing like that, illustration or painting, there's the layers of rendering that you put on top of your drawing once you get the base. But all of those things are separate areas of study. So in a half an hour video, there's only so much I can say, but I will try and give some pointers about where to begin. And one of the things is that you need to learn how to learn. So if you go in a class, you know, there's an illusion that you're going to be taught by somebody, but really what they are is they're introducing you to ideas and ways that you can then take and teach yourself, basically, because all of the learning happens in you. So hopefully that's not frustrating to hear, is that you have to teach yourself. I mean, in a strange way, we're in the position of, you know, instead of going to an auto mechanic, we have to learn to diagnose and fix our own car and rebuild it. But even if you're in a class and you get a good teacher, they're going to only just point you to stuff and a sequence of things that you then grapple with. And in the modern times, we're really out of the classical tradition. So, and that's what I'm kind of doing my best to reproduce here, is doing things in a logical order and progressing from simple things to complex things in a sort of an orderly manner. And that way you build up an instrument in yourself of understanding and of ability. And again, even if you're in a classroom, a well-ordered teacher and a knowledgeable one would be pointing you to that anyway. So at the end, in a few minutes, I'll point towards some books and things that I think are a good starting point, because what I was trying to get at in a minute ago in talking about all these different things like perspective, anatomy, light and shade, color, all that, there's really a lot in each one of them. So what you're forced to do, if you want to take a logical approach, you've got my notes here I'm going to refer to, is choose one thing at a time to study. Okay, so you'll remove a lot of frustration if you do that. Because if you jump around and just do a little bit of this, a little bit of that, you can just get into this habit where you're kind of always doing your same doodles and you never really progress. The years go by and you're doing the same kind of drawings. To make a breakthrough, what you have to do is every time you sit down to draw, take a different approach. You're going into a mode of being more analytical and studying. And of course, yeah, that can give you shivers if you don't like the schooling system. But this is your own study. It's for your own reason, your own passion, your own interest, your own love. You follow that love and you begin studying. So, but the idea is to simplify it. And I'll get into that in a moment. and that anytime you sit down and do something, you have a point. So I guess I'll start as I go. I'll start being a little more clear. So these are Ben's drawings. I printed them out, and you know, they're fairly common, you might say, from somebody who has some talent, some basic talent, but they don't know where to go next in terms of the drawing language, like how to make them more sophisticated. The first thing I'd probably say to Ben or anybody who's starting out is, as much as it's seductive to want to do rendering and inking, I would say ditch that, forget the shading and learning to brush ink and all that. Go back and learn just to draw with lines, like a pencil or a thin line marker. Just lines. Forget about shading, forget about fancy hatching and rendering and the toning and brush inking. Like, those can all be learned later, but if you get a solid foundation beneath you of drawing, everything else falls into place. So lines are the beginning. So here, see if I'm on screen enough here. You know, the main thing here is there's no idea of form, three-dimensional form. So what I mean by that is, well, this one's a straight-on drawing, and even then it just needs to be more like structured, where it's more symmetrical. And you know, I'll explain in a second what they say in different books, like Andrew Loomis books, which I'm recommending. A lot of comic book artists have looked at them or used to look at them. The ears roughly line up with the eyebrows and the bottom of the... And you can see variation in people if you go and look at them, which is another habit to get into, is always study people. And there are different types of skulls, but that's where character comes in. But, you know, you've got cheekbones here. Maybe if this person has strong cheekbones. But I was mentioning Andrew Loomis. I'll show some of those books in a minute. You can get them for free on the Internet Archive, archive.org. And you can also buy reprints on Amazon. But there's a whole bunch of these basic materials, which I'm going to recommend, and I'll show them in a sec, well, when I get through this. Pick one thing, because as I said, there's way too many resources. You can't read all the books. You can't do them all simultaneously. But what you have to do is pick one trusted source and start there and just work with that. And then you can branch out. And then you'll find that as you amass like a basic sort of understanding of what you're dealing with, you can easily grab onto more things and add them in. But what you need is to start, it's like a crystal growing. You need to start from a basic beginning understanding. So I'll say something here that, again, I'm kind of jumping around, but there's three basic things, Ben, I would say, and any beginner that's listening, as a beginning point. Use lines. That's not one of the three things, but use lines and differentiate in your mind between form, which is like three-dimensional forms, okay? Solid forms. Always, you've got to learn to train your mind and yourself to always think in terms of drawing in solid forms. Like, what is the form? Is it, you know, and you draw transparently. And I'll show you these books in a second if you haven't seen them. It's kind of stuff that's covered in Drawing Comics the Marvel Way, whatever that book is. I have it here somewhere, but which is a good book, basic book to start with too, but it doesn't explain a lot. So that's like form. I've shown this in some of my other videos. I made this years ago out of balsa wood. I carved it as an accurate replica of a rib cage. And that'll get me, this is just the three-dimensional form, right? It's a solid form. It has no outlines. You can see edges, but the lines themselves don't exist. It's just a solid three-dimensional form. So what Ben's doing here is very common. He's only thinking in 2 dimensions, really. He's not thinking of how this thing is a solid three-dimensional form and how it turns in space. And there's all kinds of things to that study. But number one is form. And then, and this is in terms of me talking about learning figure drawing, which is, if you learn figure drawing, the head, hands, and figure of the human body, you can give yourself a really good base for branching out further and adding things like perspective drawing, background drawing, light and shade, all kinds of other stuff. But you need a basic beginning point. So form, and then, yeah, what was my second one? Structure. So structure is a little bit different. These are just like random three-dimensional forms that don't have any particular function. Although this, for example, it's interesting. I kept this because I bought some new shoes, and this is one of those forms that they put inside the shoe to keep it on display, and it happened to stay inside my shoe. So I kept it because it's very cool. It's like you see, it's a three-dimensional form, and it's giving me the edges, and you could do nice drawings of this and really learn about drawing, which is another thing as I pass along here, tips I really recommend is practice drawing simple forms with your eyes. It doesn't have to be like something fancy you buy. It can be household objects. It could be something you make like this. It could be a simple skull that you buy, which is going to help you understand structure. Because structure is functional form, like forms that go together to create a certain function. This is just raw form. It does have a function too because it's from a shoe, but other than that, it's not a mechanical object. It's not more complicated. But if you start with very simple, basic three-dimensional forms and you sit down and draw them yourself from different angles, as boring as that may sound, and it's very basic advice, you will really quickly progress in being able to think three-dimensionally. And you have to force yourself to be a little bit disciplined and admit that you can't do that. And like I made this years ago, it was just a porcelain sphere, almost sphere from, I think from IKEA. And I taped tape to it to make a three-dimensional form to draw heads with. Now, in the Loomis drawing method, which is in the book, How to Draw the Head and Hands by Andrew Loomis, he visualizes the head as having the sides shaved off because skulls are sort of, you see how skulls here are kind of flatter on the sides, but you visualize this first part, the top cranium, as being a sphere. And if you want to learn to draw out of your head, as you can see John Buscema do in How to Draw Comics the Marvel Way, or all comics artists that understand construction drawing, it's called, they do this. They know how to turn these lines. So I made this years ago to remind myself about that, and I would sit there and actually, draw this and like look at the form lines from a given angle, say there. And then you've got the side one. And so of course you can turn that into a head. I'm just put this down. You can turn that into a head easily, and it's on a certain angle. And then you think of structure, which was my number 2 thing, structure. I'm segueing naturally into talking about that. So structure is the arrangement of different forms for a function. At least that's my definition of it. So here you'd have the jaw. You see how you have these cheek, oops, I'm a little too zoomed in, people. You see how you have these, the cheekbone here. And you've got a mouth. So this is like the center line I'm using here. Right? And you're always thinking of center lines. And then I'm thinking of that other line, which is the side line. I haven't drawn it on this skull, but it would be here. The side center line, and your ear is going to be placed there. And then you can add in hair. And the idea is that you can add in whatever you want. There's variations that you could make in the type of character, depending on the bone structure, and then depending on the features you add. But the idea I was saying is to think three-dimensionally in forms. Think of structure, which is how things connect together, like I said. And then the third thing, if you're going to learn to draw the figure, is if you can get access to life drawing. Now, that may not be practical for people who are very busy, or family people, or time constrained in whatever way, but you can even do it. It doesn't have to be like nude figure drawing like you would typically find, although that can be really good, of course, for learning, because you got to see the actual surface anatomy in order to put it in your head, and then you have a file bank in your head of stuff that you can pull back out, which is again what comic artists do. But if you can't do that, there are ones on the internet where you can get 3D models or drawings. Not quite as good, but an alternate that is good is you can draw yourself in a mirror, you can draw your hands, you can draw your family members, you know, if you have children while they're sleeping, or if they'll sit and pose for you. If you put that work in, that is really how you progress. You can actually make really big breakthroughs. And it's really what any well-trained artist has done. They may not talk about it a lot, but behind the scenes, for sure, 100%, they've done that. So let me see here. I've covered some of my points. Where's my, I've lost my, I'm in the middle of my video and I've lost my place. Anyway, here is another thing you can do, which is always good to know, is, and this is jumping back to what I said earlier about whenever you sit down to draw, if you're just having fun, that's one thing, nothing wrong with that. You're drawing in your usual way, you're drawing whatever you like to draw. But if you're drawing to improve yourself, you're doing exercises. You should try and do an exercise that you yourself understand the point of what you're doing and what the goal is and what you're going to get out of it. And you should try to keep it simple so that each time you do that, you can walk away and say, I learned a little something. And if you do that every day steadily, that's how you make progress and you change your deeper root ideas. Like even some of the things I've given here is like, sit down with a simple form. This isn't that simple, but a cube, and just practice drawing it, and you may get new insights. See, for example, going back to what I was talking about here, I'll zoom in. I'm using tracing paper, and see, this is all drawn flat because this is flat, and that can be a style, that can be a decorative style. There's nothing specifically wrong with that, but see how I've drawn that as if it's this is a three-dimensional circular helmet, like a World War I type helmet, and it's tipped up. So we're looking at it from a certain viewpoint. Like say we're doing kind of an upshot on this character. Maybe his eyes project out a bit so we can see a bit of the other eye here. I should probably use a marker, but hopefully that's clear. I don't know exactly what's going on with the mouth here, but maybe give him some teeth, although that looks a little funny, but you know, jawbone. And then again, if it's kind of an upshot, you might even still see a bit of the underneath. And maybe some, I like the rivets. Rivets are always good, love rivets. And then if you're thinking of form, you might have these curving around, changing their angle. And then, you know, maybe shoulders, like again, a three-dimensional form. But you're thinking of it like a solid form, like, oops, I've gone out of frame, people. See, here what I was drawing is, you're always visualizing the three-dimensional thickness. You know, it's like a solid form. You're always constructing your drawings with solid forms. And when you're building them up with those solid forms, as I said earlier, I'm gonna, oops, here we go, too zoomed in. The problem of iPhone videos. As I said earlier, think with construction lines. So here I'm always thinking of center lines and construction lines. It keeps your drawings sort of honest and lined up. Like, see here I'm thinking, imagine an imaginary line tracing down Mr. Pope's nose. It's like a contour line, and it's the middle center line, but he's turned, so we're seeing a little bit of this side, and then here, for example, I found a spacing point, the middle of the eyebrows, and I'm just going down at an angle, say that's where his eyes would be. It's not necessarily going to look like Pope, what's his name, but I'm showing you how to construct something solidly and sort of try and keep it honest. And then we get into the side plane of the face here. And his ears kind of... So, again, it's like this thing I showed you earlier, the three-dimensional construction lines. This is where if you draw from real objects, and even if you make some real objects or buy one like this and even put center lines on it if you want, if it's cheap enough, like a Halloween skull or whatever, it almost doesn't matter, but you just practice drawing the objects three-dimensionally. Like I've got a whole bunch of these. I'll show again. I've shown them on other videos, but they're things, different things I bought in flea markets and found. There's Fiji woman here, Bali woman. You know, but if you draw something like this three-dimensionally, you very quickly get an understanding of form. In the old academies, they didn't let students do fancy, complicated life drawings before they could draw three-dimensional forms very solidly and very well. And what you do is you stock your imagination and your memory and your understanding when you build this up from the beginning. I'm about 20 minutes in, so what I'm going to do is switch to talking about these books, and yeah, I'll show you a few of these books and then I'll probably wrap up, because like I said at the beginning, I mean, it's a whole long journey. And the point of this is really to kind of nudge you, maybe Ben or anybody else who's interested in finding a simple starting point, and then you just start adding in on top of that. And again, the simple starting point, study form, three-dimensional form. Forget about complicated lines and complicated shading and rendering and inking. Ditch all that for now. Learn structure. Think about things as structures. You know, like a car is like, right? A car, basic car. Everybody know, I mean, you know, the normal car, like, you know, it's got wheels at the corners. It's got something like this, like a modern car. And then if you can, do life drawing or draw from real life. It doesn't have to be model drawing. Anyway, the books, a very good one is this book. I think it's been reprinted. I think this is the same book, The Figure. It was also shown here, How to Draw the Human Figure. I'm not sure, I'm not sure if this is the identical book, but this book is by Walt Reed. I guess I have to be careful here. I don't know about internet, YouTube idiotic algorithms with nudity, if I'm going to get myself banned if I show the wrong thing. But so that's why I'm being like this. But presumably this is okay. This is an excellent book, and it's The Figure by Walt Reed. The Figure, An Artist's Approach to Drawing and Construction, compiled and edited by Walt Reed. I'll try and remember to put links to these. I'm pretty sure I found this on Amazon. You can still buy it. But it's an example of what I said about find one book or one source and start there. Like read a page a day, read 2 pages a day, do it on your lunch break. Start working through one specific thing and understand what's being gotten at. You see how great this is? Like, you've got structure here that I was talking about. It's the skeletal structure in simplified form. You could even overlay another one in here with the actual anatomy, muscles on top. But there are different great accounts on X and different places that even post anatomy overlays on things. This is form, and this is like mannequin raw form. This is somewhat more sophisticated, what you call a form figure, which is thinking in 3 dimensions. And then, of course, here you're getting into a final thing, which I'm not really recommending for now, but it's a little more final with rendering, light and shadow being projected on these forms, which takes more knowledge. I mean, you can do it from a photo, which this was probably done from. You can even learn enough about form and lighting to do it more or less well out of your head. But the book talks about proportions. Again, I'm being cautious here. It's got classical drawings. This is by Ingres. who was a very brilliant classical painter. Proportions. I won't go through the whole book, but it's filled with great stuff. And the idea is to train yourself to think this way and discipline yourself that no matter when you draw, if you want to do realistic three-dimensional drawing like you would in a comic book, that your arm, your muscle, your mind, you think that way and you work that way. That's different, of course, if you're going to do flat decorative style artwork, very cartoony or very flat stylized. That's, of course, something quite different. This is drawing the head here. This is not actually as well done. Whoever drew these, I don't know who drew these, but I'll show you another book that's really good. Everybody talks about it. Andrew Loomis, the classic. You can find these as PDFs on the Internet Archive, archive.org. And if you're cash strapped, just download the book and print out a page or two a day. But all kinds of artists like Steve Rude and all sorts of others, me, and you can probably name any comic pro, they know about these. And they've read these books. Not hard to read, very readable and interesting. And if you go through it logically, and like step by step from the beginning, I'm just randomly flipping around here, but go through step by step. You're learning proportions here, for example. And there are other books, like this is The Human Figure by David K. Rubens, which the drawings are not that slick. They're kind of chunky and lumpy almost, but they're very good for being very clear about the anatomy, so that when you look at it, it's not over fancy. It's just very straightforward, sort of meat and potatoes, but it's very good showing anatomy. And again, this is like sort of down the line, like, and I would emphasize so that you don't get that frustrated and confused feeling as a beginner. You don't have you don't have to jump into this right away. It's almost good to just begin with drawing rough form figures and trying to get the proportions solid and learn to draw in 3 dimensions, but very simply like in those other drawings. As you go, you can add in understanding of bones and anatomy and the finer stuff that you need to somewhat memorize to be able to draw figures out of your head, as opposed to just tracing 3D models that you found or 3D assets. Like that kind of art, you can see right away when an artist has never studied this stuff because they don't know what they're tracing. They haven't memorized these different muscle patterns and attachments and groups. And again, it's a building up thing, because when you do the prior work, the earlier stuff, you can add this in later. But I'm just showing these as some examples. I think I've got another one here by Andrew Loomis. I'm going to censor it because I'm leery of these stupid AI bots that troll around, so I'm going to be careful here about what I show. So I think this is probably okay. It's called Figure Drawing for All It's Worth, and it's another great book by Andrew Loomis. He's got quite a number. I think there's 4 or 5 of them that he did. There's another one called, for example, Creative Illustration, that's excellent. It gets into perspective and composition. There's photos here of people. So, oops. Oh well. Am I paranoid? Yes, I am. Anyway, that was a stylized drawing, so probably those crazy bots don't care. Look, that's my sort of starter talk. It's about 30 minutes. I'm just checking if I covered things. Well, another couple of little notes I had to myself here. Don't be scared to redo drawings. So use that tracing paper, or you can just, once you have a drawing, if you've done a drawing, you can, well, this has got this printed on the back, but if you do a drawing and it's on a blank sheet of paper, just flip it over on the back and you can see through it and redraw it again. Or if you have a light table, draw and redraw, and then look at your drawings and figure out if you're making it better or making it worse. Because what you need to get to is a place where you can self-analyze and that you can figure out and troubleshoot what is upwards and what is backwards, right, or downwards. And you want that sort of self-analytical too. And the way you can do that is simply just by drawing and redrawing, and then maybe even leave them for a few days and go back and look at them. And when you get that cold moment where you just look at something, it's almost like you're looking at someone else's drawing. And we're all much better at analyzing other people's work than our own work because we fall in love with it. But when you get that cold moment after a few days or a week, you can sometimes see quite instantly, oh, that head's way too big, or the arm's off, or things like that. And then what you do is, if it's a rough sketch and you're not being precious about it, because you're not trying to ink it finely or make some thing to show people, they're all just like rough working drawings, the way these are. They're not precious objects. What you can do is just draw right over it, grab a marker and just be very loose. And that's the mentality a pro has, is like, it's all plasticine, it's all rubber. You do a drawing and then you go, that's not quite right, you erase, or if you're on the computer, you use a layer, or you chop it out with the lasso tool in Photoshop and just delete it, part of it, and then move it around. But you can do the same things in real time with real paper, tracing paper, redrawing. You can look at stuff upside down. If you want to see the design and pattern of something, you can trick yourself by looking at it upside down, see where the shapes flow. That's like another subject of a whole talk. You can look at something very far away. I can't show this here because I got my phone zoomed in, but you look at it very zoomed down on the computer or very far away, you can see if it makes sense from a distance, and it should. If it's got a strong composition, you should still be able to discern what it is. Yeah, so I think I'll end it there. I've got a note to myself here: incremental improvements. That's really the key to so many things. I see people tweeting about this on X, the gurus and self-help coaches, but they're right. Like, if you just sort of randomly, vaguely do something every day, and you're in your, like I said earlier, you're in your kind of basic groove and habit, that can be fun. There's nothing wrong with it, but you won't necessarily learn. What you have to do is learn to just focus down onto one thing and try and get something new to happen, an incremental improvement, where then you to start taking steps. So then you're like the toddler, or the baby that goes from like not being able to do anything to learning to control its hands, and then to stomach, roll over, maybe sit up, start crawling. Anyone who's had kids understands that you see a very distinct and classic sequence of improvement, and then they learn to cruise along like the couch and hold on, and one glorious day they learn to walk and then run and then do gymnastics and borrow the family car. But anyway, the idea is, if you're going to humble yourself, do it properly and go back to the beginning, learn basic forms, learn these things like anatomy. There's really no other way around it. And if you realize that anyone you admire, they're not gods or geniuses necessarily. They're just people who went back and did that. And they did that step by step with resolve and discipline. And I would hazard the guess that most discovered, like I certainly did, that after you do that a little bit, it's like a magic secret, because you start liking it. You start going like, actually, this is really interesting. And I'm getting results finally, small results, but I'm getting definite improvement. And then it's very exciting. Then you can't let go because you've found that pathway that you were looking for. It will not arrive randomly, though, in most cases, if it hasn't already. Like, if you're one of those people who's a little kid and can draw really well, maybe, who knows, God implants it, I don't know. But I wasn't like that. I had to really work hard and study, and I'm still doing it, So, and I'm going to continue on because I find it interesting. And what I call climbing Art Mountain, it's like an endless slope upwards to the heights. You just, every plateau you reach, there's another height when you look up. And I think that's a really good place to end it. I wish you luck if you're a drawing student. It's very exciting. Look on archive.org. I'll try and remember to put in the description of this video some of the links to some of these different things, but you can easily find them if you just Google archive.org and the name of the book, or even drawing instruction, for example. You can find all kinds of books. And there you go. Good luck. I hope you enjoyed this. If you did, please like it, comment, ask me questions. I will eventually answer. And please do share it on social media if you find this useful. Bye for now.